Welcome to Untold Stories of the Torah, a masterclass in Jewish history, presented by Rabbi Shmuel Aber.
Yeshaya Hanavi was one of the largest anomalies when it came to prophets. He was a member of the royal family, closely related to the kings, a grandson of a king. He was killed in an incredibly gruesome way. Axe-wielding soldiers swung at his mouth, killing him. He's one of the most prolific contributors to the Haftarahs. He was one of the longest living prophets, and he's also one of the largest sources when it comes to what the world will be like when Moshiach comes. And in spite of it, most people don't know much about him. Yeshaya's life is a mystery, in part because his book is so large and the details about his life are spread around throughout the book, not even in order of time events in chronology at all. And also in part because so much of the story of Yeshaya does not come directly from the Torah itself, but comes from the Gemara and the Medrash and the stories that were passed down over the generations. The origin of the story of Yeshaya comes way before the story even begins, and it comes from Yehuda. Yehuda had a wife, Tamar, and this Tamar had twins, and the modesty of Tamar, the sensitivity to herself that Tamar had, created an incredible impression for Hashem. And Hashem blessed her with the line of kings to come from her, and also promised her to have prophets. The kings, of course, was a Davidic line, direct descendant of her son Peretz, but also the prophets were also a descendant of her, and that came about through Yeshaya's father, whose name was Amitz, who was a prophet, including Yeshaya, who was also a prophet. And that was her reward for her incredible modesty in her father-in-law's house. The Jewish people came into Israel after being in the desert through Moshe, and then Yeshua, and 300 and change years they spent being ruled by judges. David HaMelech was anointed as a king, and from that point on, his line continued. And all the kings, at least in the south of Israel, as we'll discuss shortly, were all descendants of David HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech, his son Solomon, built the Beis HaMikdash, and for generations, Shlomo's descendants and David HaMelech's descendants continued to rule the land of Israel. But there was one exception. About 100 and change years after, a little more, the king Yehoram, who was married to Atalia, died. His son Achaz became king, and Achaz went to the north, and Achaz was killed. Instead of the son of Achaz becoming king, Queen Atalia decided to murder her entire family. It was her own children she killed, her own grandchildren she killed, her nephews, her nieces, absolutely everybody. Anyone she could get her hands on, she killed them. And one baby managed to survive. And that baby was a threat. The wife of the Kohen Gadol, who was a relative as well, but obviously not a threat, the wife of the Kohen Gadol took this tiny little baby, whose name was Yoash, and hid this baby in the one place where she knew he'd be safe, and that was in the Holy of the Holies inside of the Beis HaMikdash. That was the one place where no one would dare to touch the baby, because everyone knew once a year only the high priest is allowed to go in, only the Kohen Gadol is allowed to go in once a year, and so she hid him. And it was successful. No one imagined that the baby would be hiding there. Queen Atalia completely forgot about the one threat to her kingdom, because no one was declaring that he existed. And in that way, years went by. And when the child was 7 years old, they took the baby out. The high priest, the Kohen Gadol, took the baby out into the Beis HaMikdash and told people, this is the last descendant of David HaMelech, of King David. Queen Atalia, of course, wasn't going to take that, and she was ready to call her army. She escaped the temple, getting ready to get the soldiers ready to attack, and the people that were faithful to the line of King David, of David HaMelech, chased after her and waited until she left the temple and then killed her. King Yoash becomes king at the age of 7 years old, and he was an incredibly righteous king. He renovated the temple, he made incredible changes, many of which exist in Judaism till today, and so long as his teacher Yehoyada HaKohen, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, was alive, King Yoash was extremely faithful to Hashem, followed in the ways of the Torah, and was a very, very successful leader. He had a son, King Achaz, and another son whose name was Amoitz. These two sons were brothers. One became the king, and another one was extremely righteous and became a prophet. He reached the high level of connection to God, connection to Hashem, enabling himself to have prophecy, and he was a prophet for the Jewish people. King Achaz was the king. His brother Amoitz and Amoitz had a son by the name of Yeshaya, who this topic is about. So for context, and this is very important to understand, Yeshaya Hanavi, his grandfather was King Yoash, whose entire family was wiped out. It means there was very little royalty left. His uncle was King Achaz, and King Uzziah, who was the next king after that, was his cousin. So Yeshaya Hanavi was royalty and very, very high up the line of heir to the throne. Yeshaya Hanavi was a force to be reckoned with, aside for his spirituality and his goodness and his wonderful character and the love that he managed to collect from the nation. He was also someone of extreme power, because he was cousins and a nephew and a grandson, and then a first cousin twice removed and 3 times removed from the king, the reigning king of the south of Israel. Yeshaya was born to Amoitz, and he was born already circumcised, which is already a sign that this was someone to be special, like Moshe Rabbeinu, who he was a reincarnation of. He was born already circumcised. The laws pertaining to how the circumcision was done is very interesting. They just make a slight cut in order to remove a touch of blood, but other than that, he's born circumcised. He doesn't need to have a circumcision in the regular way because it's already done. He was born perfect in that way, and that was already a sign to the future of what type of person he would become. He studied under Amos. Amos was a great righteous man, a prophet of his own, and he was the official teacher of Yeshaya. Yeshaya learnt under him to such a degree that he learnt under him that in the official tradition of the passing of the Torah from one teacher to student, 40 generations from the time of Moshe till the completion of the Talmud, till the completion of the Gemara, Yeshaya is on that list. He's one of the official transmitters of the Torah. He received the Torah from Amos. Just to give a little bit of context, Moshe received the Torah from God. Moshe gave it over to Yeshua. Yeshua gave it over to Pinchas. Pinchas gave it over to Eli. Eli gave it over to Shmuel, Samuel. Shmuel gave it over to King David HaMelech. And on until it came to Yeshaya, 200 years later after David HaMelech. And then Yeshaya passed it on throughout the chain. So Yeshaya is a very important person, not just in prophecy and not just in royalty, but also in the actual official tradition of the passing of the Torah from teacher to student. Yeshaya is one of those important 40 figures who are the link, the chain from the end of the Talmud to the beginning of Moshe receiving the Torah on Har Sinai. He lived in the south of Israel. Of course, he was royalty. He was related to the king of the south of Israel, and he lived there. Hosea prophesied, a different prophet prophesied in the north of Israel, and Yeshaya was the one that prophesied in the south of Israel, and he lived, for context, 207 years after the building of the Beis HaMikdash, after the building of the first temple, and about 500 and change years after the Jews came into Israel. So Yeshua's entry into Israel about 560 years or so later, and 200 years after the building of the first Beis HaMikdash. Right in the middle, and a little more context of when he lived, 100 years after Eliyahu Hanavi goes up in fire chariot to heaven, that's when he lived, and a touch more context, 200 years before the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash. That was Yeshaya's start of his career. But he wasn't born a prophet. Yeshaya was, for the first 34 years, a great righteous man, a son of a prophet, but he didn't have any prophecy. And then, in the year 207 after the building of the temple, or 619 BC, before Common Era, Yeshaya receives his first prophecy. And the events surrounding that were very interesting. Yeshaya's first cousin was a very, very righteous king. His name was King Uzziah. And King Uzziah served God with extreme devotion. He was a very private, quiet, dedicated man. He didn't want the job of becoming king, but it was thrust upon him. His father was the king, and he was next in line, so he became the king. He served God with extreme passion, and he loved God so deeply. And during his time, there was an exceptional amount of success for the south half of Israel. his kingdom. Spiritual success, physical success, the nation flourished physically, and the spirituality was very, very strong in his time. And King Uzziah thought to himself, seeing all the success, I want to serve God in the greatest way. The best way to demonstrate the greatness of God would be for the king of the Jewish people, myself, says Uzziah, to serve God. And if I make a public display of affection and devotion to God, well then I could bring the greatest delight and the greatest testimony to God's greatness. And so he thought to himself, what's the greatest service? The greatest service that occurs in Judaism is the frankincense, the spices mentioned in the Torah that the Kohanim, that the priests bring in the Beis HaMikdash in the temple. Bringing those up to Hashem is an extremely holy, special, intimate event. And King Uzziah thought to himself, well, if I bring that, it will be so much more meaningful than a priest, than a Kohen bringing it, because a Kohen is a great person, but I'm the king of the Jewish people. And that the logic is actually rather convincing. You know, it makes sense. He's the king, and he should serve the king, and it would be such a fitting testimony to God. The problem, of course, is, and this is the lesson for us to learn, that it doesn't matter what our rationale tells us. We have to follow what God tells us. We have to follow what the Torah tells us, and even if the logic lines up, and it is a great testament to God's greatness if the king is the one that does it, the Torah says specifically that it must be a Kohen that does it, and therefore, as wonderful as King Uzziah's motives were, it was misplaced, because it wasn't completely in line with what Torah instructs us to do. And so King Uzziah took a pan, put the ingredients of the frankincense of the Ketores onto the pan, and marched himself into the Beis HaMikdash. The Kohanim, of course, tried to stop him. They said, what's going on? There's rules. There's not any regular person, even a king, could bring the Ketores out of the golden Mizbeach. It has to be someone that's a descendant of Aaron, a Kohen. It has to be a priest. It has to be a Kohen. And he told them, if you don't get out of the way, I'm going to send my soldiers against you. And they refused to go. The Kohanim were very dedicated. And so he sent the soldiers. And in that moment, something tremendous happened. The entire ground, the foundations of the Beis HaMikdash began to shake. A massive chasm, a break in the ground appeared under the Beis HaMikdash, and everything began to shaking. And in that very moment, leprosy broke out on King Uzziah's forehead. He was extremely righteous. And this infraction was so troubling, because God judges righteous people far stricter and far swifter than he judges regular people. So King Uzziah was punished with leprosy on the spot. Leprosy broke out on his face. Trembling occurred underneath the entire temple. The temple itself shook, and people started running in all directions. King Uzziah ran too. The Kohanim ran and chasing after King Uzziah to ensure that he really left the temple. So much was their dedication towards God and ensuring that the Beis HaMikdash was kept under the clear watch of the Torah guidelines. They chased him out, and people ran in all directions. But Yeshaya, who was there at the time, watching his cousin doing something devastatingly wrong, Yeshaya was still there. He didn't run. He remained in the building as the Beis HaMikdash began to fill with smoke. Hashem came down with his throne and with the angels to judge and decide what was to happen in this very strange situation where Uzziah was bringing the incense illegally. And so Yeshaya remained there. And Yeshaya saw an incredible vision. It's the vision of the Merkava, the vision of the throne of God. And Yeshaya saw the temple, the Beis HaMikdash filled with smoke. He saw the throne of God, and he heard the angels singing the praise of God. And in that experience, he saw something very interesting. Unlike regular people, when it's their time to shine, or their time to sing, or their time to have the spotlight, they're trying to outdo and outshine other people. The angels were encouraging each other to speak. Again, an incredible lesson on how generous we need to be to other people and how kind we need to be to other people. A godly experience is not one where one person's trying to outshadow and outstrip another. A godly experience is where we're trying to always make place and room and generosity of spirit to another. And Yeshaya saw and experienced this, and then he heard the angels chanting something we now know because of Yeshaya, because of this story, a very famous verse, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Hashem Tzva'os Melech Halayos Kavod, which means God is holy, 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 and the whole world is filled with his presence. Yeshaya heard this. He heard the angels singing it, and the walls, the doorposts of the Beis HaMikdash began to shake as this whole experience unfolded. And Yeshaya was so overwhelmed by this experience, he believed that this must be the end. This must be him passing away. Seeing angels is connected with passing away, and Yeshaya said, well, this is the end. And so in the excitement and the confusion of it all, Yeshaya didn't join in the praise, which on someone, again, on his level, it was an infraction. He should have heard the praise of God and instantly joined in as well, but he didn't. He was so overwhelmed by the experience that he didn't join in with the praise. Upon realizing that this was prophecy, he had never been a prophet before. He had never experienced prophecy. This was the first moment of prophecy of Yeshaya. He's seeing a vision that wasn't death, it was prophecy. Suddenly realizing his mistake, he calls out to God and says, God, I'm a man of impure lips, among a people of impure lips. Please forgive me for my infraction. Unfortunately, that was another problem. Again, for a regular person, that wouldn't have been considered a problem at all. But for someone as great as Yeshaya, someone as great as we're going to mention, the greatest of the greatest prophets, this was a problem. And God told Yeshaya, how dare you talk about the Jewish people in a negative way? You said you're a man of impure lips, all right, but among a people of impure lips, you don't get to talk about my children that way. And God told Yeshaya, for the first infraction, that you didn't join in the praises of the angels, I'll punish you now. For the infraction of calling the Jewish people a people of impure lips, that I'll punish you later on. Many, many years, decades later, Yeshaya finally got the punishment for calling the Jewish people with any connotation of negativity. And straight away, as a repercussion for him not joining the songs of the angels, a Saraf, a very great type of angel, rushed over to the main altar, the main Mizbeach, took tongs, and deep into the fire of the Mizbeach, of the altar, he grabbed coals and brought those coals to Yeshaya's mouth, burning his mouth, giving him, like Moses, like Moshe, giving him a lisp, a stutter. The rabbis asked, why did he have to bring coals? The angels could carry fire on their own. And there's two explanations. One is that the punishment of direct coals would have been too intense for Yeshaya, or too much of a punishment, and it was a slight infraction, so the tongues would kind of soften the heat of the coals. Another explanation is that the angels couldn't touch the coals of the Mizbeach. The sacrifices that occurred in the temple, in the Beis HaMikdash, were of such holiness. It was such a pure connection between the Jewish people and God that the coals of that fire was too much even for angels. And so the angel needed to have tongues in order to have any form of contact with these coals, these coals of the altar. Yeshaya gets burnt, and that's not the end. That's not the end of the story. Suddenly Yeshaya hears a voice, and the voice says, who is going to be the person to go and tell the Jewish people my prophecies, my rebuke? Yeshaya heard Hashem offering out the opportunity. Who wants to be that person, to be the prophet of the Jewish people? Yeshaya hears the voice, and straight away he understands that this is for him. And he calls out and he says, I'll be the one to do it. And Hashem says, are you sure you want to be the one to do it? He said, there are other prophets that have been around. Amos, for example, he gave prophecy to the Jewish people, and they mocked him for his stutter, for his stammer, for the way he spoke. They mocked him continuously. Micha, they would slap him around. He was a prophet of God, and the Jewish people slapped him around. God tells Yeshaya, are you sure you're up for this task? And Yeshaya understood the lesson, and he told God, he said, even if they chase after me and they pluck the beard hairs out of my face, I'll still do it. I want to help the Jewish people. And God was extremely pleased with that answer. He said, if you're willing to do it, then I will help you. And God told Yeshaya something only Moshe Rabbeinu, only Moses had been promised until then. He said, I will be your personal teacher. All other prophets, all other leaders, aside from Moshe, the first prophet, they were taught by someone else. Their prophecy was a gift and they were trained by someone else. Moshe, of course, was the first prophet. No one was there to teach him. And so God himself taught Moshe. And God said, in the case of you, Yeshaya, because of your abundant love for the Jewish people, I'm willing to have that same type of relationship. Well, I'll personally train you and guide you along your journey of prophecy, where you'll have this direct connection with me without having to have the guidance of another teacher. Another thing God told him is, he said, in your prophecies, I'll let you use double expression. Double expression, when you use expression of doubling, it's an expression of fondness, of closeness. When you call a friend and you repeat their name twice, it has like this gentle camaraderie, this loving type of relationship. And God said you'll be able to use that type of verbiage in your prophecies because of your deep love of the Jewish people. Someone that loves the Jewish people this much, I have a love for them. And one of the most famous prophecies is Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. It's Yeshaya consoling the Jewish people, telling them you're going to have double comforts. Now, some people explain it's the first and second temple that he's comforting them for the future for, but you also see this idea that Yeshaya is using a double expression, showing his outpouring love for the Jewish people, and God giving him that ability to use that double expression. Yeshaya is then given instructions of rebuke he's supposed to give the Jewish people, and then that prophecy ends, and for the next 88 years, Yeshaya is going to continue to give prophecy of all different types, which we'll discuss later on, the different styles of prophecy that Yeshaya had. But first, something interesting. How did Yeshaya, when he heard God addressing out to the public, how did he understand that this message was for him? God didn't ask him, do you, Yeshaya, want to be a Navi? He just said, who will be the Navi? And Yeshaya understood somehow that was his own mission. There's this really interesting story in the Gemara. There's a great rabbi by the name of Yeshaya Hanavi, one of the most famous rabbis in the Gemara, and he had a study partner by the name of Ilfa. This story happened hundreds of years after the story of Yeshaya, but it has a great lesson for the story. And he studied with his study partner for many years, and at some point they said, listen, we've been studying Torah with complete dedication for such a long time. It's time for us to make some form of livelihood for our family. Let's go and make a living. So they both set out, and along the pathway they stopped for the night under a ruin, which again is a lesson of its own, not to sleep under or sit under or go under ruins, shaky walls or shaky buildings. They were there, and they sat down to relax, and behind the wall, Rabbi Yochanan hears a strange conversation. Two angels are chatting with each other, and one angel says, let's topple this wall down and kill both these people, because they left Torah study, and they're going to make money, a temporary life, a life of just making a buck here, making a dollar there. It's a temporary life. It's not real assurance of anything. It's nothing goodness. Torah, studying Torah, that's goodness, and they left that behind. And the other angel says, don't do it. Don't topple the wall. One of them is going to become a great sage, going to become a great Jewish leader. So Rabbi Yochanan turned to his friend Ilfa and said, did you hear the message? Did you hear anything just happen now? He said, I don't know what you're talking about. And Rabbi Yochanan understood in that moment that the fact that he was the one that heard it, even though it wasn't addressed to him, was a clear indication that that message was for him. And so he turned himself around, he said goodbye to his friend who continued on to do business. He said goodbye, he went back to the study hall and became the very famous Rabbi Yochanan that we know till today. And again, the story of these prophets, the story of these rabbis, they're not stories of just history. This is not a history lesson. This is a lesson on how to live our life. And a lot of times when we see things that need to be changed, things that we see problems in the world, that a lot of times is a message to us. The fact that you feel that this person or this thing needs to be changed is God's way of instructing and guiding you that change needs to happen by you. And you might argue, well, there are greater people out there, let them do it. They're so much smarter, they're so much wiser, they're so much older, they're so much more experienced. The fact that they don't have that feeling and they don't see that problem and they don't see that issue and you do is a clear indication that this is God's calling for you, that you're the one that needs to make that change. Rabbi Yochanan understood that, and Yeshaya did too. He heard the voice of God saying, who wants to do this? And he said, well, I'm hearing this message. Clearly this message is for me. And he dedicated the rest of his very, very long life to going around and helping the Jews become the best versions of themselves. For a matter of completion, just so we understand the end of the story, Yeshaya's vision ended at that point. King Uzziah ran out of the temple, and he had leprosy. For the next 26 years, he was a reigning king. He had leprosy. Leprosy means he couldn't go back to his house, couldn't go back to his palace, couldn't go back even into the city of Jerusalem, and he lived in a cemetery in a little hut by himself. Strangely enough, it wasn't such a upset for him. He never wanted to become king, as we mentioned at the beginning. He had always wanted a simple, private, dedicated life to God, and he got it. He spent the next 26 years praying and learning and studying and connecting to God, and his son took over as the king, as the acting king, and his son had incredible dedication to his father. Even though his father was no longer an acting king, and he was for all intents and purposes, the ruler of the Jewish people, the king of the Jewish people, every time he wrote a document, every time he made a decree, he always invoked his father's name. He always said, I am the son, Yosem was his name, I'm Yosem, the son of King Uzziah, and I'm making such and such a decree in the place, in the name of my father, the king. He continuously invoked his father as such an incredible respect to his father. He had respect for his father. He said, my father's still the king. I'm just the acting king. Don't get too carried away. Don't treat me like a king. I'm just the acting king. I'm just sitting on the chair and making the rules. But my father, he's still alive. And he's the king. This King Yosem was incredibly righteous. In fact, he's the only king to not be associated with a single sin. Now, of course, King David didn't do a sin, and that's an explanation of itself. King David was far too righteous and too great to do any forms of sin, but there was sins that were associated with his story. King Yosem, on the other hand, had an absolutely clean record, not a single thing. Perfection. 26 of his years of reigning was why his father was still alive, leading a life that his father wanted to lead the whole time. This perfect private life in leprosy, but in complete dedication to God, studying and praying completely undisturbed. But Yeshaya's life just began. His mission just begun, and he would now spend the rest of his lifetime going around helping the Jewish people in a very complicated, tricky career, where some of the kings were extremely righteous, and some of the kings unfortunately did some of the worst atrocities in the history of the Jewish people. And Yeshaya had to navigate that, all while being related to the kings that were in question. So in the case of King Yosem, Yeshaya was his cousin, and King Yosem was an incredible king. But as we're going to get through the story, you'll start to see not all the kings were all incredible, and not all their behaviors were all in line with what's considered a noble and Torah way. Yeshaya's book is interesting in that it's very long. It's 66 chapters packed with prophecies containing everything, from Moshiach to what's going to happen to different empires and different nations. He even talks about the Egyptians. What's the final verdict for their history? What's going to happen in the end with the Egyptian empire? He deals with so many different topics and so many different encouragements. The rabbis, in fact, say that even the sharpest rebukes of Yeshaya, all of it, kula nechemta, it's all comfort. Yeshaya was only trying to comfort the Jewish people, only trying to uplift them. None of it's actual real rebuke. It's hard to understand that when you read some of the prophecies, because some of them are sharp, and some of them are very, very hard to swallow. They're very, very intense prophecies, and yet the rabbis tell us that it's all entirely comfort. And one of them, I'll give you an example, because this is mainly a conversation about the story of Yeshaya, but an example of one of the prophecies of Yeshaya, arguably the most famous one, the starting one, it says, Chazon Yeshaya ben, a vision of Yeshaya, the son of Amitz. And the rabbis say that Chazon Yeshaya ben Amitz is a rebuke, a warning, and it's a prediction of horrible events that are going to happen. Yeshaya is telling the Jewish people, correct your evil ways, or the Beis HaMikdash is going to be destroyed, and the Jews are going to go into exile. And yet something strange happens with that prophecy. We still read that prophecy. In fact, before we commemorate the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the week before, the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, we read that prophecy. And the rabbis teach us that that prophecy is also comfort. It's teaching us about the coming of Moshiach, that we have a vision of the third temple on that Shabbos, on that weekend. We actually have a vision. Our soul has a vision of the building of the Beis HaMikdash. And the question, of course, is, well, make up your mind. Is that rebuke? Is that predictions of doom? Or is that prophecy a promise for betterment in the future of the coming of Moshiach? You can't have both. It can't be a prediction of dreadfulness and prediction of goodness. Either it's goodness and it's all about Moshiach, or it's what it seems to be, a prediction of catastrophe, of dreadful events to come. That 200 years later, Yeshaya is telling Jewish people, correct your ways or the Beis HaMikdash is going to be destroyed. The Rebbe asks that question, and he gives a really beautiful explanation. He says it's almost like a teacher. A teacher's teaching a student, having a wonderful experience with a student, and then suddenly in the middle of learning, the teacher stands up and rushes out of the room, and the student's so surprised. What's going on? I thought the teacher's having such a wonderful connection. He's explaining such deep, wonderful, beautiful ideas to me. This is beautiful. What did I do wrong? What's happening? And a while later, the teacher returns and says, I want to tell you a new idea. And he tells the student a beautiful lesson, far more beautiful than anything the student has ever learnt before. So the student says to the teacher, what happened? 2 questions now. Number 1, why do you rush out of the room? And question number 2, how did you get this beautiful explanation? So the teacher explains to him. He said, I was in the middle of teaching you, and then suddenly a wild idea, a bright light came into my mind, and I needed to develop it. If I would continue learning with you, well then I would just be on the same track that I was before, and I wouldn't be able to develop and nurture this idea, so I need to rush out of the room. I need to collect my thoughts and develop this beautiful idea, far more beautiful than anything you've ever heard before. And then I came back in the room and gave you this beautiful, brilliant idea, and the absence is what enabled this incredible revelation to happen. Yeshaya is exactly the same thing. This vision of the dreadfulness to come, the exile that we're still in, that's very sad and very tragic. But there's a silver lining to it all. In that void of exile, God willing today, we'll be able to experience the coming of Moshiach, and then that bright light that will come will be far greater and outstrip many times over all the light and all the brilliance that we ever had until now. The coming of Moshiach, the coming of Messiah, is going to be an experience that far outshadows anything we've ever had until this day. So, going back to the prophecies of Yeshaya, even the most strongest prophecies of doom have within inside themselves deep comfort. We're able to read his prophecies and realize that inside of all of that is such a comfort for what we're now going to appreciate, the coming of Moshiach. Moving along to a few of the other types of prophecies of Yeshaya. We'll deal with a few and then we'll continue on with the story. A few more of the topics of Yeshaya. Yeshaya deals with the coming of Moshiach. In fact, some of the greatest prophecies concerning the coming of Moshiach come directly from Yeshaya. So much of what we know about what the world will be like when Moshiach comes directly out of the 66 chapters written by Yeshaya, or recorded in the name of Yeshaya. The famous words that are emboldened on the UN building about beating the swords into plowshares. When Moshiach comes, swords are not going to be used anymore. People won't use weaponry. Instead, they'll use them for plowshares to plow the ground, or spears turning into pruning hooks. This is a quote directly from Yeshaya. No nations will lift swords against each other, and they won't have any more war. Straight from Yeshaya. The wolf lying with the lamb, the leopard with the baby goat, the calf and the lion, the child and the snake, and eating straw instead of eating each other. These ideas all come directly from Yeshaya. So what we know about the world, what the world will be like when Mashiach comes, these prophecies are prophecies that Yeshaya told the Jewish people of his time, were recorded, and we're able to learn and know about it, and the anticipation that we're able to have, fulfilling our duty of anticipating Mashiach every day, is so much easier because of the incredible prophecies that Yeshaya gave us. One of the most famous, and one that Chassidus talks about so much, about the whole world being filled with the knowledge of God, and comparing it to the way that water covers over the seabed. That's another famous prophecy from Yeshaya, that same chapter 11. It's mentioned in there as well. So much of what we know about what the world will be like is all prophecies given to us by Yeshaya throughout his extremely long career. Other interesting prophecies, in addition to the coming of Moshiach, and in addition to the prophecies that we'll talk about in the next class, the immediate prophecies, another topic that Yeshaya deals with is what's going to happen to the other nations. At that time, there were many empires, most of whom we've never heard about at all. But at that time, Yeshaya, there were very important nations. People wondered, or I guess Yeshaya's job, whether people wondered or not, was to tell people this is what's going to happen to this particular nation and that particular nation. Yeshaya deals with it. So he goes through the different nations like Babylon, Moav, Egypt, Edom, Tyre, these different empires that were really powerful empires that no one could imagine would fall. Yeshaya didn't just predict them falling, but predicted how they would fall. Again, I haven't seen this written anywhere, but the way I understand it is Yeshaya's predictions are very helpful for Mashiach, because when you see with such accuracy how he describes the falling of other nations, and you see 100 years later, 50 years later, 200 years later, 300 years later, these events unfolding exactly as he described, you suddenly start to realize his predictions for Mashiach are going to be the same way. It can be very hard to imagine, it's going to be impossible to see, and then it's going to happen exactly as he says. Precisely, exactly. And we see nowadays so much of the predictions of peace in the world and goodness and transference of negativity into positivity in so many elements. These predictions that seemed impossible that Yeshaya talked about are starting to unfold now. literally as we're approaching the coming of Moshiach. Another interesting theme, and I think this will be the last idea that we talk about the prophecy style and the greatness of the themes of Yeshaya's prophecy, is the difference between Yeshaya's description of the heavenly throne and the description mentioned by Ezekiel many years later. Two great prophets spoke about the throne of God, and their descriptions are entirely different. Yeshaya has four sentences describing the entire event. Ezekiel, many years later, has an entire chapter dedicated to it. Both of them, the secrets behind them are deep secrets that beyond the class. These are the deepest secrets that we know of. But what's interesting is that one of the prophets uses so many words and one prophet uses so few words, and you wonder if they saw the same thing, as the Gemara says they did. They both saw exactly the same vision, then why did one describe it with so much detail and the other describe it with so little? And this comes to the next and final point of discussing Yeshaya's prophecy. Yeshaya was the greatest of the prophets. Not Moses. Moshe was a different caliber. He came from the highest world, the world of Atzilus. But all other prophets, all regular prophets that wasn't Moses himself, Yeshaya was the greatest. Yeshaya was compared to a son of a nobleman, a person who hangs around the royal city, who's been in and out the palace continuously, and then he's asked to describe the king. His description will be all about the king, and it'll be very brief because very little impresses him. But you have the son of a villager that suddenly shows up and is given he'll be impressed. He'll say the spires of the castle went to the heavens. He'll say that the expanse of the castle was so massive. The soldiers, you should have seen the soldiers. They were dressed immaculately. They had gold swords and gold ribbons, and he'll describe everything he sees because everything will be he lives in a village. And now he sees the royal city. Every detail will be fascinating. The throne room, he can't stop describing because all of it will be just so fascinating and riveting. And then he'll discuss the king. In the case of the son of the nobleman, however, the one thing that will impress him is the king. So he'll spend very little real estate of the description talking about all the pomp. He'll just say the king, and that's what will make the son of the nobleman and he'll describe the king. He'll be so impressed, so he'll only need a few words, only need a few sentences. Yecheskel, on the other hand, the son of the villager, it's not just the king that he's saying, he's impressed by the entire scene. All of it's so fresh and so new to him, and that's why, even though they saw exactly the same thing, Yecheskel describes it in extremely great detail, and Yeshaya barely gives it any real estate. The next section is the story of King Achaz. King Uzziah, King Yosam, even though King Uzziah did what was arguably a very, very serious sin, he was a very righteous man. King Yosam was a perfect king, and then he passed away, and they was taken over by a king by the name of King Achaz. King Achaz was not pure or special like his father and his grandfather. In fact, he was very involved in sin to an extreme degree. In fact, he persecuted Jewish religious behavior. He closed down all the study halls. He locked the doors of the temple, not letting the general public inside. He sacrificed to three of the dominant idol-worshipping cults that existed at that time, Baal, Asherah, and Moshiach. Moshiach being something extremely dangerous and horrific and a horrible form of idolatry where people sacrificed, they killed their own children. They burnt their own children alive. Achaz killed every single one of his children. He had no heir to the throne at first because every single one of his children that were born, he just killed them in this cult of idolatry. And finally, his wife coated one of their children in the blood of a special type of lizard and coated him very thick, and in the merit of King Achaz's father and King Achaz's grandfather, this boy managed to survive, and this became King Chizkiyahu, who we'll talk about later. But King Achaz was a dreadful king in his behavior in so many elements. He did have some positive elements, and we'll talk about those too, but his overall behavior was really, really not behavior we would like to emulate. Hashem came to Yeshaya and told Yeshaya, I want you to go to King Achaz, and I want you to tell King Achaz, he's worried about two enemies coming towards him. Tell him not to fear, I'm going to protect him. not in his merit, but in the merit of his righteous father and in the merit of his righteous grandfather, King Uzziah and King Yosem, respectively, he's going to experience an incredible miracle. Now, so for some context of what was going on, the north and the south of Israel had already been divided for quite a long time. The north part of the Israel was run by Jewish leaders, but from any tribe, and for the most part they didn't last very long. Each king successively killed the previous king or the previous king's son, and it was a turnaround of many kings. There was a lot of bloodshed, there was a lot of chaos, it wasn't organized, there was no lineage that lasted more than 4 or 5 generations, because at some point they were just assassinated and killed, and their behavior in the north of Israel was exceedingly wicked. There weren't the good kings and the average kings like there were in the south. For the most part, the north of Israel had extremely wicked kings who really didn't follow in the ways of Hashem in the slightest. The north of Israel at that point was being ruled by the second last king of the north, and that his name was Pekach ben Remaliah. Pekach ben Remaliah made allegiance with the king of Aram, whose name was Rezin, and the two of them decided, let's go to the south, let's lay siege on Jerusalem, let's create chaos, and let's take over that kingdom. Let's kick out the descendant of King David. They didn't care about David. I mean, they already had their own kingdom in the north, but they wanted to take over it all. And so they said, let's get rid of the king of the south. And so they made a few campaigns. Their campaigns weren't to go to Jerusalem, it was to go to more to other cities, more let's call them further cities out, and they were very successful. King Achaz tried to defend. It was not the defense was not successful at all. In fact, on one day, these two kings combined managed to kill 120,000 Jewish men from the south of Israel and took 200,000 captives in one single day. That's how successful the campaign against the south was. King Achaz was a wicked king. Hashem sent him punishment, and the punishment was the north of Israel and the king of Aram, and they were terrifying. They really created incredible damage, and they took captives north, and along the way a prophet by the name of Oded caught up with them and told the king and told the men, what are you doing taking fellow Jews as captives? Return them. This is not the way. How much are you going to anger God? You've already gone to war, a civil war against fellow Jews. Now you're going to take them as captives, making them as slaves, which is completely against the ways of Torah. And the North King and the North Kingdom heard that. They heard the words of the prophet. They weren't very inclined to listen to the words of the prophet, generally speaking. But in this particular case, it actually had an impact, and they felt bad about it. And they realized they're making a big mistake, and they stopped what could have been one of the worst events in Jewish history. They stopped it in its bud. They said, "You're right." They clothed, they fed, they dressed all these people they were about to make slaves, and they told them, "Go back home." So they went back home, but the war was far from over. The north of Israel and the king of Aram very much wanted to conquer the south. Slavery was one thing, but conquering the south, that was something they were still very much intent on doing. And so they gathered the army again together, and they started marching towards Jerusalem with every intention to kill King Achaz, take over the south of Israel, and declare the south of Israel to be a subject or a united government with the north, which was not good in the slightest. So Hashem sends Yeshaya and tells Yeshaya, go to King Achaz and tell King Achaz, though you're not worthy, don't be scared of these two kings. These two kings are like firebrands. They're like coals without any fire ability substance. Two poles that aren't able to do anything. Hashem is going to save you. And King Achaz, he saw the prophet coming, and the prophet came with his son. His son's name was Yoshev, which was a hint for the future that the Jewish people were going to return after the exile. That his son's name was very apropos, as was going to be his other son very apropos. And the king saw his cousin and his cousin's son, a prophet and prophet's son, and he hid his face in shame. He knew that his behavior was wrong, and this was actually considered a very good quality. The fact that he had shame was considered a very positive thing about King Achaz. Though he did so many wicked behavior, having shame, having regret about doing these things is considered a sense of positivity. At least you're not bald-faced about it. You have a sense of shame. You know what's right. You might be too weak to do what's right, but at least you know what's right and what's wrong, and what's supposed to be and what's not supposed to be. So King Achaz felt very guilty, and he covered his face in shame, but he had no intention of listening to the prophet. In fact, he already was in so much fear of these two kings, he was already trying to find a way out of his problems without using God. So he didn't want to give any form of credit or any form of allegiance to God because he didn't want to change his lifestyle. So he's told Yeshaya, thank you, but no thank you. I don't need your prophecies. I don't need your help. And he sent Yeshaya away. And Yeshaya begged me, he said, listen, just don't do anything. Don't go and try to get outside help. Just believe that God is going to save you. And Achaz couldn't do that. He said, no, I'm going to try fix this problem myself. And Yeshaya begged him not to, and Achaz wouldn't listen. And so Achaz went and found an ally. He found the king of Assyria, and he told Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria, he said, listen, let's make a deal. I'll give you a tremendous amount of money. I have 2 enemies. Go and help me. Meanwhile, Hashem sends Yeshaya back to King Achaz and tells King Achaz, what are you doing? Don't involve anyone else in this. God is going to help you without any intervention. But if you involve Tiglath-Pileser, that's a lack of belief in God. Just sit back and wait for the miracle to happen. And Yeshaya told him a very interesting thing. Yeshaya told the king, King Achaz, said, give me any single sign and I'll make sure it happens. Test God. Tell me what you want to happen. I'll make sure it happens. Anything. And King Achaz said, I'm not going to give a sign. I don't want a sign. I don't want any involvement with God. I've got this under control myself. And Yeshaya told him, you don't. And King Achaz wouldn't even give him a sign. Wouldn't ask for anything. So Yeshaya Hanavi told him, you know what? I'll give you a sign. You want to know that this is the truth. That these 2 people are no threat at all. And that God is going to protect you in the merit of your father, your grandfather. He said, there's going to be a woman. And this woman's going to give birth to a child. And this child's going to be grow up with butter and honey. The famine, the siege, which already started at that point, is going to be gone by the time the child is a baby. That's how quick the deliverance. King Achaz had prepared himself for an alliance with a king he really didn't want to deal with, but he believed that this was going to be a really outstretched problem. And Yeshaya told King Achaz, don't worry, you won't even have to worry beyond a few months. In a few months' time, the child that's going to be born is going to name Emmanuel. That little baby boy is going to be living in pomp and in royalty because the siege is going to be over and the 2 problems are going to be gone. Now, King Achaz, of course, wasn't interested in any prophecy related to God. He had his own plans and his own motives, and so he ignored this prophecy. The prophecy still happened. Yeshaya went home and had a baby. With most opinions, that person was his wife. His wife, through prophecy, without being told, named that their own child Emmanuel. And meanwhile, exactly as Yeshaya had predicted to King Achaz, that's exactly what happened. In the north, Pekach and Remaliah was killed by his own men. Uprising broke out, and Hoshea ben Elah became the new king. That was the end of that war. Pekach ben Remaliah was a leading force of that war, and now that he'd been assassinated by his own men, the whole thing just crumbled. And what King Achaz thought was going to be the end of his kingdom, the end of his life, it just evaporated, exactly as Yeshaya had predicted. And the king of Aram got attacked by Assyria. The king of Assyria, Tiglath-Pileser, the person that King Achaz had paid a fortune in money to get rid of, did that job. He got rid of the king of Aram, and he killed Rezin, and he got rid of that kingdom. King Achaz was kind of happy. That half of it was done without any intervention, half of it was done with his own intervention. The problem, of course, was that as soon as Tiglath-Pileser had finished with the king of Aram, Tiglath-Pileser said, actually, I don't like you all that much. And together with his army began marching south, now planning to attack the south of Israel. So what Yeshaya had begged King Achaz not to do, not to involve anyone else, just wait back. God's going to make a miracle for you. The child's going to be born, and that child is going to be your proof. He's going to be living in pomp and peace. King Achaz hadn't listened to the prophet, had involved other people, and the person he'd involved is exactly what had gone wrong. Now this person became his own enemy. The king of Assyria, Tiglath-Pileser, now declared King Achaz to be his enemy, and now he wanted to have a war against him. God willing, in the upcoming class, we'll deal with the second half of Yeshaya's career, story of King Chizkiyahu, a very righteous king, and then King Manasseh, and the drama that unfolds in between that all.
Thank you for listening to Untold Stories of the Torah. If you enjoyed this episode, help us spread the word by subscribing to this channel and leaving us a review.